When we are caught in a cultural phenomenon, it is often hard for us to see through it and less being able to articulate about it. And I want to make a couple of videos trying to articulate about one of those phenomena, which you could already feel and sense around you. For instance, going to any bookstore, you will see a section dedicated to Buddhism and find the titles such as mindful parenting, mindful breathing, or why Buddhism is true, or tantric sex, or perhaps in a magazine article you read that Buddhism is very similar to science, or perhaps your psychotherapist applies Buddhist principles to psychotherapy, or perhaps you hear your friends saying, Buddhism is not religion but a philosophy, a way of life, or perhaps you have meditation apps on your phone. So all these examples show the Buddhist influences around us and the particular way that Buddhism is interpreted in the West. And all these examples, you could feel that they are somehow connected, weaved by the thread of Buddhism. Let's call this phenomenon Buddhist modernism. We can classify Buddhist modernism as a type of phenomenon that comes about when a foreign religion, in this case Buddhism, is first transplanted into a new cultural and religious environment. This is what happened 2,000 years ago when Buddhism first came to China, or 1,400 years ago when Buddhism came to Tibet. It took Chinese and Tibetan Buddhists centuries to translate the text and to internalize the Buddhist teachings and transforming it. But this took time, and in the West, Buddhism did not start in earnest until less than 100 years ago. So we are still at this early stage when Buddhism is interacting with the cultural elements of the West, trying to find its footing in this new civilization. Eventually, I'm optimistic that this interaction will yield to a mature form of Western Buddhism. But right now, we are at this immature phase when many texts have not yet been translated into Western languages, when there has not yet been an established vision about how Buddhism is like in the West, when people could pick and choose as they see fit and even manipulate it for their own agenda. Buddhist scholars have been observing about Buddhist modernism for some time, and I want to make a couple of videos summarizing their observations as well as offer my own. I hope that by knowing about this, we could come to have a sense of context about what's happening in the West, and a context about how Buddhism may be like in Asia, in order to situate our own experience with Buddhism and to interpret our observations around us. There are many ways to talk about Buddhist modernism. It has a wide range of different phenomena. And in this video, I would like to focus on how Buddhism interacts with the therapeutic and the capitalistic culture of the West. I'd like to start with a scenario that 6 months ago you broke up and you still have not recovered from it. In fact, you feel worse. You not only feel unloved by your ex-girlfriend or boyfriend, that you feel unlovable by anyone. That you not only lose confidence in your relationship, but also in other spheres of your life. At this point, you need help, and you have two persons to talk to, a Western psychotherapist and a Buddhist master. If you go to a psychotherapist, he or she will point out what you are doing. You are generalizing. You are generalizing an episode of acute pain to a general state of depression that permeates all spheres of your life. But if you go to a Buddhist master, he will probably slap his thigh and say, "Congratulations, for you have understood the first truth that Buddha taught, which is that life is suffering." He will probably add that not only your relationship is shit. Your entire existence is shit. You are not only unlovable, you are literally worthless. You are not even a person. So on and so forth. So, so you can see Buddhist master is adopting a completely opposite approach, a radical generalization. He sees no mental illness. He sees a perfect condition for someone to undertake Buddhist practice. So this scenario can tell us a lot of things. First is that don't hire a Buddhist master as a counselor, and second, that Western psychology and Buddhist psychology seems to have very different ideas about what constitute sanity. I don't know much about psychology, but perhaps it could be said that the Western model of mental health assumes that the baseline is a socially functioning adult who is generally happy. Of course, that person may have some anxieties, but he could improve upon it by sleeping better, having a hobby, or practicing mindful meditation. But it's only when that person goes way beyond the baseline that he or she is labeled as mentally ill and need to be brought back to the baseline. In the Buddhist psychology, however, everyone is insane. This is the bottom line, and everyone is fundamentally suffering. It's upon realizing the suffering and by cultivating a terror and repugnance towards the suffering that one finds the motivations to undertake Buddhist practices. To drive this point home, I want to cite a metaphor written by Buddhaghosa, a Theravada commentator living in the 5th century. It's a metaphor of a mother whose 3 sons were going to be decapitated. On the execution ground, the mother witnessed her 2 sons decapitated, and now her youngest son, his head was also about to be cut off. Now imagine the terror, the hopelessness that the mother is feeling. And that feeling, Buddhaghosa likens it to what an advanced Buddhist practitioner feels about the prospect of gaining happiness in this world. You want another story that could destroy your peace and love image about Buddhism like that? You can find a lot of those in Buddhism. Well, this metaphor is a bit radical even for Buddhists, but many stories do portray the feeling of disillusionment, of despair, of existential angst as the motivating force that drove one's Buddhist practices. So it's quite ironical that a practice that is meant to cultivate a desire to leave the world is not co-opted to become a science of happiness, a means of living better in this world. Meditation, for instance, it is meant to help you penetrate the illusion, but is now sold as a cure for your headache, a palliative for your anxiety, a booster for your productivity. And whenever people want to meditate, the first questions they ask is, what's in it for me? And whenever I am asked this question, I've tried 2 different answers. The first is by going to the Buddhist doctrines, by talking about that life is suffering and the transcendence of it, and people think you are crazy. The second answer is by talking about, well, how meditation improves your concentration, help you be more mindful to the everyday moment. This answer always works, even though afterwards I always feel strange. It is like prayer, even though science proves that prayer helps you sleep. Is that why you pray? A religious practice, even though its essential mission is a sacred one. It is to help you transcend the illusion, transcend the thing. It does come with circular benefits, like meditation. It could indeed help you cope with anxiety, and it's perfectly fine to profit from those benefits. I'm thinking about the novel Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. There's a scene in which Siddhartha quits his spiritual pursuit and goes to look for a job. His prospect employer asks him what you can do, and he says, I can think, I can fast, and I can wait. And those are spiritual qualities that Siddhartha had cultivated um, as a religious person, but now made him enormously successful. And if that's how he wishes to apply it, his energy and his qualities, that's perfectly fine. Most people are not interested in spiritual freedom anyway, if they believe in it at all, especially if they are happy and content with their lives. Why seek anything else? It is like that for most Asian Buddhists. They practice for having a better karma for the sake of their well-being in this world. Even in monasteries, many monks practice for more or less as pursuing a career rather than seeking an immediate Buddhahood. So in that aspect, Western Buddhists and Asian Buddhists are not that different. But an important difference, I think, is that Asian Buddhists are not claiming what they are not doing. They know more or less that they are in a matrix and that they are not actively trying to escape from it, but they do admire the determined few who are actively pursuing the Buddhahood. Another example is the Buddhist scholar Paul William. After a lifetime studying Buddhism, he converted back to Christianity, believing that he could not find hope in Buddhism. And that's fair enough if what he's looking for is hope and other things. And I think there's even wisdom in being able to acknowledge what you truly want rather than pursuing what you think you should want. And there's wisdom in acknowledging your own limitation. I think the real danger comes when people lose sight of the transcendental core of Buddhism. A religion is always in a constant tension between its transcendental, sacred mission and its connection to the people, to the society, and the danger comes when one side tilts to the other. And I think what we are seeing right now is that this seesaw between the sacred and the secular is now tilting towards the secular when everything that people see in Buddhism is its secular benefits. When we stop seeing Buddhist practices and teachings in its larger context, then we run the risk of letting the social forces, such as neoliberal and capitalistic forces, of depriving them of their original purposes and being used to serve sinister purposes. That's why eventually we'll need some orthodox, some mainstream framework for interpreting Buddhism. You may not like the word orthodox because it implies intolerance towards heresies, and certainly overemphasis on orthodox has its own problems. But without having a firm, resilient vision about how Buddhism should be like, then it could easily be devoured by the social influences around it. And that's what we are seeing right now when any marketer could easily label its product as Buddhism related and capitalize on the prestige and exoticness of Buddhism, and in the process change how we perceive Buddhism. Whereas no marketer dares to label Christian prayer as a self-help technique, for one reason, because it's such an ingrained part of the context of the Christianity that you cannot talk about prayer without talking about its deeper religious significance. So far, I've talked about Western Buddhism being often coached in a therapeutic language, and that it is often emphasized for its benefits of enhancing our well-being. But because the Western model of mental health has its own idea about what is a sane, happy person, it disregards the part of Buddhism that says that even a socially functioning, sane adult it is also suffering, and that he also needs to transcend his suffering. So as we can see, the therapeutic Buddhism is not interested in disrupting the status quo, but by restoring the status quo and enhancing it. But when something is not disruptive, it is in turn disrupted by and co-opted by the social forces around it. In other words, when Buddhist teachings are not presented as the path of bringing us above suffering, then it becomes promoted as the cures for the everyday ailments. It's promoted as a cure for insomnia, as a booster for productivity. But then, how is this fundamentally different from, let's say, a sleeping pill or a cup of coffee or other commodities for that matter? As a consequence, Buddhist teachings could become easily turned into commodities in the capitalistic market. At this point, I want to interject a comment that even though I've been critical towards the therapeutic and the capitalistic culture, I do believe that if Buddhism could interact rightfully with the capitalistic, therapeutic, and the scientific culture, this interaction could go on and develop unique and wonderful traits of Western Buddhism. And Buddhism has always proven itself capable of retaining its spiritual essence while adapting itself to the local customs and the local economy. I think one of the best examples is this Chinese Buddhist school. In Chinese, it's called 三阶教 or Three Stages Teaching. It existed from the 6th to the 9th century. For a while, it functioned as a financial institution, and everyone could borrow money from it, doing so without signing a contract. And it's up to the borrower to decide when and how much money he wants to return, if he returns the money at all. From the modern common sense, we will expect the system to fail on its first stage, but the system became so successful that it even threatened the central government. I think the Three Stages Teaching School is a great example showing how Buddhist values could shape the Buddhist economy. And in our own days, there have been several theoretical attempts to apply Buddhist values to the economics. For instance, the 1973 classic, Small is Beautiful, has a chapter dedicated to Buddhist economy. And more recently, the professor of economy at the Purdue University, Otto Cham, has written an article on Buddhist economy, which I translated it into Chinese. You can see the description below for these books, as well as all the other books and articles that I mentioned in this video. However, what we are seeing right now is not that Buddhism as a active force shaping the economy, but as more as this amorphous, gullible thing that everyone can help himself to and manipulate for his own self-interest. Take mindfulness as an example. It is now a $4 billion industry, and on Amazon there are over 10,000 books that has the word mindfulness in the title. And even KFC, yes, the Kentucky Fried Chicken, has developed, a pop-based meditation system. For your entertainment, I'm going to show you just one clip.
Comfort zone. Comfort zone. Kentucky Fried Chicken's pot pie-based meditation system. Let's begin. Inhale the delicious aroma. Visualize the deeper world beneath the crust. Imagine the peas, the carrots, ready for more. The comfort zone is a groundbreaking system of personal meditation, mindfulness, and affirmation.
I think this video must be a parody because it's so ridiculous. And I refuse to believe whoever made this could not see how ridiculous this is. It feels outright evil. But this video is out there, and this thing could be true, could be a real thing. And this very ambiguity makes us realize the sad reality that mindfulness is completely defenseless, even in regard to the most crude form of manipulation. And there's not a shred of sacredness in it that could prevent it from being used to serve the propagation of greed, the very thing that Buddhism is against. Well, you may say that this KFC campaign represents a undignified distortion of a more dignified movement that is well-meaning, that is more respectable. But is this the so-called more respectable mindfulness movement completely not responsible for its more undignified counterpart? When mindfulness movement emphasize meditation solely for its benefits for how our health and our mental health, and when then promote it as a side effect free alternative, a superior alternative to the pills and the coffees, could we already not see this degeneration coming? Do they in fact not share the same paradigm? In fact, I think the more spiritual, the more benign the mindful movement seems, the more subtle its danger is, and is therefore more dangerous. Because at least when you see a obvious shenanigan like this KFC campaign, your bullshit alarm will start squeaking a mile away. But when you encounter the mindful technique that promotes such wise sayings, such as focus on here and now, that suffering is not external, you create your own suffering, or that there's no self, you don't really exist. I mean, such wise sayings, how could this go wrong? I mean, those sayings that I've just quoted could be found somewhere in Buddhist texts, but the way that they are presented and doing so without a context make them extremely susceptible to being used as a force of social control. I'm not talking about the forceful social control exercised by some authoritarian regimes. I'm talking about what Michel Foucault would call the technique of self versus the technique of domination. It's a kind of a technique, it's kind of social controls that engineers your own subjectivity, that reprograms your soul so that you carries out the social command, the external command voluntarily while believing that you are exercising your own free will. For instance, when you find your company environment, the working condition intolerable, instead of seeing the real culprit as the exploitative behavior of your company, you blame yourself and try to meditate your discontentment away, telling yourself that you create this discontentment in order to help the company to further exploit yourself, or in a relationship, instead of seeing the fundamental incompatibilities with your partner or seeing his or her manipulative behaviors, you think the problem lies in yourself, and you try to meditate yourself to a flimsy peace that is ultimately rooted in self-delusion. I think the futility of this approach could be likened to the practice of recycling. By overemphasizing the importance of this individual effort of recycling, we are led to believe that the fundamental cause of the environmental crisis lies in our own personal wasteful behavior. And so we are distracted from seeing the real problem, that is the mass productions of plastics by corporations and their overuse in retails. But as Scientific American magazine says, recycling plastic is to saving the earth, or hammering a nail is to halting a falling skyscraper. That's why I think mindfulness could be particularly dangerous because it is a technique working with your psyche and it could be used to control it while making yourself believe that you are free, that you are pursuing happiness and making progress in life. And there's no better way to imprison someone than making him or herself believe that he or she is already free. This social control, even though subtle and sinister, has already in fact been observed and dissected by scholars for a while now. You can find the critique in the critiques towards the neoliberalism, towards positive psychology, towards entrepreneurship, or even against the very idea of progress. And all these critiques could be applied to critiquing this mindfulness movement. Below, I will cite some of these books, and there's one book titled Mac Mindfulness, as in McDonald Mindfulness, How Mindfulness Became the Capitalistic Spirituality. And this book bears precisely on the critique the of the phenomenon of mindful mania. But this book represents essentially a social cultural critique of the mindfulness movement, and it's only scratching the surface, for it does not look at a deeper root of the problem, which has to do with how the word mindfulness is interpreted. Nowadays, no matter if you are the critique or the proponent of mindfulness, you tend to take for granted the meaning of mindfulness without delve into the rich and diverse interpretations of the term mindfulness. But if we adopt a historical perspective, a philological, a philosophical approach, then we will come to see that the modern interpretation of mindfulness is in fact based only on one among many interpretations of mindfulness, and is in fact a controversial interpretation in the Theravada tradition in Southeast Asia. And this modern interpretation is made popular by the Vipassana movement that grew in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And this interpretation is characterized by a so-called bare attention, as the word bare, naked, implies. It is the kind of attentions that focus on present and now, that is bare of, devoid of our conceptual thinking and judgment. It teaches us to focus, observe the sensory inputs without conceptualizing them, without discriminating them. So this teaching is deliberately asking us to relinquish our ability to discriminate, to bypass our intellect. So what's the surprise there that this interpretation lends itself so easily to the manipulation of capitalists who don't want us to use our brain too much. But as I said, this interpretation is only one among many interpretations. And in fact, the Sanskrit word for mindfulness, smrti, or in Pali, sati, or Chinese, nian, or in Tibetan, chenpa, the word literally means to remember, to recollect, to bear in mind. And as the word implies, it requires us to use our recollective faculty, our ability to remember. And this meaning already doesn't jibe so well with interpretations of mindfulness as bare attention. Besides, even the kind of meditations that discourages thinking, I think that's fine. I think it's even necessary because we are overthinking anyway. And we do need meditation to bring back some stillness, some emptiness back into our life, which could in fact help us to think more clearly and to react more clearly later on. So I feel like the social cultural critique is really making a straw man. It depicts a kind of passive meditator with low intelligence. But in reality, people could very well use the clarity that they gain in meditation to affect real changes in their lives. I don't mean to say that the danger presented by the social cultural critique is not real. I think it's very real. I just think that it is not very constructive. It is because it might make people overreact and and to abolish and to not to see the potential good of the Buddha's practices whatsoever. But I believe that if the Buddhist teachings and practices could be integrated into the Western paradigm, it could. I have no doubt that it could bring positive, real changes to the individual and to the society. And when that day comes, the Western Buddhism has every right to call itself a form of Buddhism. In this video, I've talked about many things. I hope it's not too discursive, but my train of thought is this: that in the West, Buddhist teachings and practices are overly emphasized for their benefit, for our welfare in this world, while they are supposed to take us beyond this world. In other words, there is a sociological dimension to it, a need for salvation, for transcendence, which is apparently lacking in the Buddhist movements in the West. When I say that, I didn't mean to say that all Asian Buddhists are setting their eyes up to the Buddha who everyone is practicing for transcending the world. No, I think Asian Buddhists are not unlike their Western counterparts in that they are also practicing for accumulating merits for the welfare of this lifetime or the next lifetime. Doesn't matter, because it's always about their welfare in the world. Big difference, I would say, is that Asian Buddhists, consciously or not, believe in the need to transcend. Well, they may have different levels of understandings about transcendence, but it could be said that Asian Buddhists then do subscribe to the first Buddhist truth that life is suffering, that we are living in illusion. And I think it's in this point that is fundamentally opposed to the Western model of mental health, which has its own idea about what is sanity. But when one believes that one is sane, then could he feel the need to transcend, to escape the status quo? Whereas according to Buddhism, if one could not come to terms with that life is suffering, that we are fundamentally deluded, then one will not have the right motivation to renounce the world and to seek higher purposes. Personally, even without talking about transcendence, I feel like any genuine transformation is preceded by a genuine suffering. Using a metaphor, in order to send a rocket to reach the escape velocity, it needs a strong fuel, and those fuels, I think, has to be like strong emotions such as despair, existential angst, rather than peace and love, rather than a confidence in one's own ability. Because if one pursues enlightenment by starting out believing that one is fundamentally sane, then I feel like he is only pursuing enlightenment as another project in his life. In other words, he is circularizing enlightenment. And by circularizing Buddhism, by taking Buddhist practices and teachings from their religious transcendental context, now these Buddhist elements are without a context, without a orthodox that will help us interpret it. Now they are like electrons that break away from the nucleus, that dart around without anything that hold them in place. And as a result, anyone can pick and choose and use them for their own agenda. And that's what we are seeing now, such as in mindfulness, which is now a $1 billion industry. And mindfulness could even be used as a form of social control. End this video on a more constructive note. As I said, Buddhism has always proven itself adaptable to the local mentality, to the local economy. And in the West, I believe this will also be the case. The West is marked, among many other things, by its emphasis on individual well-being, by its Judeo-Christian mentality, by its scientific worldview. And right now, Buddhism is interacting with all these socio-cultural, religious paradigms. Even though the way that they are interacting are sometimes problematic, but I'm optimistic that we will come to have a more firm, more healthy vision about the place of Buddhism in the Western civilizations, so that Buddhism could become an active force in shaping the Western civilization, such as in altering its economy, such as challenging the psychological model, and many, many other things.